Ladies and gentlemen, this forum is a forum concerned with tools for working with families, which when I heard about it sounded like incorporating the cast of My Kitchen Rules to help you. You know, tools. Anyway. Total respect. Tools for working with families. A common approach to assessment and referral support. Outcome star, which obviously is a thing, which I shall learn. That's you, you're the outcome star. And signs of safety. So your speakers are Amarylise Bessey. And Amarylise, as her mother will tell you, her name makes perfect sense. Amarylise, Amarylise Bessey, the Senior Research Alliance for Children and Youth. Dr. Lisa Harris, lecturer in social policy at RMIT, that's the star outcome. Evelyn Williams, who works with Quality Improvement and Workforce Development Unit of Children and Youth Services. And our final speaker on, well, I've just got 3 listed and there are 4 of you. And you're a ring-in! My goodness. Sharon, don't cover it up. Sharon Andrews from
RMIT. Lisa's colleague in crime.
Lisa's colleague in crime, another star outcome. Would you welcome Sharon as well to the panel, please? So Lisa's going to speak and Sharon's going to tell her what to speak. I think that's the way that it works. So why don't we kick it off with Amarylise? Amarylise particular areas of policy research, along with her managerial roles and policy-driven initiatives, are expertise in conducting research with children and their families and communications research. And today she shares her vast pool of knowledge in those areas with you. Welcome, Amarylise.
Have to set it to vertically challenged height. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a tough slot, the graveyard shift, so I'm glad that it's Libby's favourite session for the forum. My name's Amarylise Bessey, as you heard, and I'm from the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, ARACI. The quick plug for ARACI is that you should all join. It's free. We're the peak body who represent all people working in child and youth wellbeing across Australia. So we're your peak body. So please join us. I was here to wave the banner and then I forgot to get it out. It's behind the curtain. Oops. Don't worry about it. Okay, so at ARACI our job is to bring together the best minds and the best evidence and translate that evidence into practice. So today I'm here to talk to you about one such activity, but I wanted to start with a story. Oh, there, she's up there. She's not up there, so I'm confused. But isn't she cute? I'm sorry I didn't scour my Blackadder back catalogue. I wanted to last night, I really did. Instead, I've just got cute pictures, and I hope that's all right with everybody. I wanted to start with a story about Katie, and it's a story that's familiar to us all, very familiar to a couple of you in the audience. I'm sorry if you've heard this story before. At 5, Katie was what we describe as ready for school. She was a bright, delightful, bubbly child. So cute. Look at those pigtails. And she started school very, very nicely. Her kinder year went well, but by year 1 things weren't going so well. The things that people noticed were that Katie wasn't quite so engaged in the classroom, a bit distracted. Sometimes she didn't have a jumper, and her teacher didn't really know Mum, so couldn't really talk to her about it. By year 2, her academic achievement had really fallen off, and she complained of being hungry. She didn't always have breakfast, and she was often left out on the playground having trouble socially. Her teacher tried to talk to Mum about it, but just really felt a bit uncomfortable in bringing it up. In year 3, Katie came to school with bruises on her arms. Her teacher asked Katie what happened, and she said, "Mum hit me." So a mandatory report was made, and eventually Katie was removed from the home. Now, it's a sad story, And it's a story that's all too common. A child that enters the system after years of escalating problems and with a whole lot of people who noticed the signs but did nothing. Not because they didn't care, but because they weren't sure how. And that's really what I'm here to talk to you about, is the how. This could be called the reinventing the wheel session, I suppose. But really what I'm here to do is to talk about how we get back in touch with, I think Michael said it yesterday, is in middle class America they just talk to each other. I'm not sure that's necessarily any more true there than it is here, but this is about how we get back to talking to each other. In 2008, new graphic, Racy launched the landmark report Inverting the Pyramid, which said some things that weren't a surprise to any of us. It said that our system is broken, it's upside down. We put all of our money at what should be the pointy end of the pyramid, our money, our effort, our energy, our heart, and it doesn't leave a lot for those kids who aren't at the pointy end of that pyramid. It means the pyramid was upside down and wasn't so pointy anymore. Often people aren't accessing support because it was too late, they were in full-blown crisis, or because they didn't know how to access support, or because they were trying to access but they weren't eligible, or because the services were offered in a way that didn't meet their needs, or simply because nobody asked. The report also identified an opportunity, our universal system. It identified that our maternal and child health system is world class, and in Tasmania is classier than some others. That the vast majority of Australian kids attend school, and that virtually all or most of our disadvantaged families are in regular contact with Centrelink. So 3 universal platforms. But what was identified was that the professionals in those roles, and I liked the term social connectors in those roles, didn't quite know how to respond to early and emerging needs. They needed skills, or they needed confidence. What was very much identified is that what was needed was some skills to give those people the confidence to get back in touch with their capacity to ask. And that's where the common approach came from. It was called, as it still said in the introduction, the common approach to assessment, referral and support. And I don't like those words. One of them is assessment. That's the one I really don't like, because it implies for families that you're in or you're out, you qualify or you don't, you get help or you don't, or we'll take your kids or we won't. So assessment is not really a word I like to use. You won't ever hear me call it by the acronym. If I could change it, I'd make it the common approach to asking, responding and supporting. It's designed to be a simple grassroots way to help universal service providers and those in secondary services as well work more holistically, put the wellbeing of children at the centre of their work, focus on identifying strengths and building resilience. I liked the idea that people are not just walking needs, they're people. So we're not just focusing on diagnosing problems. And to help us work in partnership with families, that it's about working with families, about giving them the power to make decisions about their lives, not about what we can do or how we can fit them into our service. I should say that the development of the common approach was funded by the federal government under the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children, and was the only prevention-focused activity under the national framework. I guess shows the focus still is at that pointy end of the pyramid. It recognised that we're very strict, well-articulated processes for working with children in crisis. We know how to make a mandatory report, but what we don't know how to do, or what we don't feel confident in, is responding much earlier. And it's at that point that many professionals do one of two things. The worst one is that they do nothing. The other one that's almost as bad is that they make a mandatory report that's not appropriate, that's inappropriate, it's too early. But those reports happen because professionals feel that that's one way they can get some support for this family. So it's really to help find an alternative pathway, a different response to the families that we're dealing with. In Katie's case, all of those early people who noticed the signs lack the confidence to do anything about it. How many of you have had the moment where you said, I can't ask about that, I wouldn't know what to say? Or, I don't have time to be dealing with all of their problems, I can only deal with the ones I'm qualified for. We'll come back to Katie a bit later, and don't worry, there's a happy ending. At its core, the common approach is a map in your mind. There it is. To help you structure a conversation, to think about a child, to think about a family. It can be used when they're presenting to you with initial concerns, but also when you're just getting to know them. It's based on the ecological model of the child. I know we've seen a few wheels already in the last couple of days, and you're about to see more. So it shouldn't feel like rocket science. It's got the child at the centre, and then all of the interactions and relationships they have. And it's really important that the child is at the centre of all of those interactions. Even when we're having a conversation in an adult-focused service, putting the child at the centre is really motivating, really helps bring us back to the focus. What it does is takes the child or the client out of our silo. It stops us coming at them with a service response from the first time we meet them, and it starts with the story about them rather than the story about how we can fit them in. So very much about moving them away from our silos and getting to know their real story. Now, it is supported by a set of tools, the common approach, and I brought some with me. I have a box that I don't want to put back in my suitcase. So if anybody, particularly those of you who are participating in the pilot here in Launceston, want some more, I've got them over there. Please come and see me. So there are tools. There's a wheel pad, which exists in several versions for different professional needs if you want them. There are 2 questionnaires, one for young people and one for parents. There's also a guidance manual to support professionals, and in the pipeline is an online collection and client management system that will allow better sharing of information so that our clients don't have to tell their stories multiple times. But it's more than a set of tools, and that's why I put them down again. It's designed to complement the hands it's in. I think I'd better skip through my slides there. Designed to complement the hands it's in, which means that it works with your level of experience, the tools that you already like to use, the ways that you work. If a professional is very inexperienced, and I think about those brand new teachers or your brand new caseworkers or those people who really don't have the words to have a conversation like this, then the common approach gives them very explicit guidance on how to do it. If you're very experienced, it becomes a visual prompt that's very helpful in engaging a family in a conversation, of keeping a record of a conversation, and to be very transparent about the notes that we take and how we share information. Some of the best examples of how I've seen the common approach used is when the tools are not used. In one site, a very experienced mental health professionals working with very young children wanted to take a strengths-based approach. They knew that there were some needs, but they wanted to get to know these children more fully. So they set up play stations around each of the domains of wellbeing. And they had a conversation with each of these children about their strengths and needs in all of the domains of wellbeing. So they used the map in their mind of the common approach, and their existing tools and practices complemented them beautifully. And I think that's really important, because when we start to talk about tools and using tools, people get worried that all the stuff they already know and spent thousands of dollars on gets thrown out. And that's certainly not the case here. There's also lots of great examples of how the common approach can be used in a classroom setting, in a group setting, as well as used in an organisational setting to plan, to map, to set priorities. And we've also seen the use, I talk a lot about universal and secondary providers, we see a lot of successful use of the common approach by even tertiary services. And I know that a lot of you here today are in that pointy end. While the Common Approach wasn't designed to help deal with that initial crisis, it's not a risk management tool, it's not a risk assessment tool, it's not that crisis management. But once that initial crisis is dealt with, once we've made the report or we've found the family alternate housing or whatever it is, it really does help in framing the way back or the road to recovery or the plan from here on in. Now, I should tell you that our knowledge about the Common Approach has been developed over quite a long time. The Common Approach was developed by a steering group that included all state representatives, steering groups and peak bodies, all of the relevant folks, and then went through a formative evaluation with 4 sites, very different. So we've learnt a lot about that. And now we're working in quite a few very different arenas, including in the Education Department in South Australia. But we're certainly most proud of the work that we do here in Tasmania. We're working with Anglicare and with many of you in health and human services, in education and amongst the service providers. We talk about implementation because we know that just giving you training and tools doesn't work, because we need to help you fit them into the work that you do. So that's one of the core activities that we do. There's my little model. And then we train. So we don't train until we've been through all of that with you. But I've been given the wind up, so let's quickly get back to Katie, because isn't she beautiful? Imagine if somebody felt confident enough to act when Katie was in year 1. Imagine if someone had helped her mum access the support she needed. And imagine if she looked like this today instead. Thank you very much.
I'm glad Katie turned out okay. So I was concerned. Speaker number 2 in this session, Lisa. Lisa's work explores community sector-driven research, social policy development and implementation and the use of outcome measurement tools in the human services sector. She's all over this thing called the Outcome Star, and she joins you today. Dr. Lisa Harris.
Hello, and also Dr. Sharon Andrews, who is possibly the more useful part of the partnership at different times. One of the things I suppose that excites us about this is the material we've seen over the conference yesterday and today, and particularly at looking, for instance, at the, get me confused, I can't use the word assessment, but the thing that opens discussions, is that idea of thinking through well how it is that we're working with people, understanding how do we progress that space, I suppose. And in a way, the Outcome Star is part of that journey. And in a sense, irrespective of what tool you might be thinking about using, it's about thinking through that in the context of doing it well and understanding how we're improving iteratively the way we work with people. The Outcome Star was developed in the UK, and it's a bottom-up development. So basically the initial star was a homelessness star, and there was a whole series of people who had made it through homelessness and were living integrated lives back in the community, and they came together with St Mungo's, which is a large NGO, and Triangle Consulting, and they wanted to find out what it was that worked, what happened, what was important in their journey that made the changes that happened sustainable for them over the long term. And so they came up with this sort of idea of domains, various areas of work, and then this idea of, okay, but what actually happened in that process of change for you as an individual, and for you within your family context, and for you within your community context, to understand what opportunities stuck for you at that point. And so they developed this notion of the Outcome Star. Now, underpinning, and I'll just show you the family star. Don't know whether you can see that very well or not. Each of the star has what we call a number of domains, and there's 23 different stars currently available. each star has a series of domains, and those domains cover those areas of importance in life. The underpinning philosophy behind the approach of the outcome star is this notion of the journey of change, and that in any one of those particular domains, people will be at a certain place. Now, it's not a severity index, it's about their relationship with that particular area. So the bottom level of that, 1 and 2, as it were, is what they call stuck, which is other people might think I have a problem with that. I don't think I have a problem with that, and I don't want to talk about it. And many of us who have worked in direct service will clearly have memories of working with clients who come in with particular issues. You understand from your own professional position that there are other issues at play, but they're at that point not wanting to engage with those areas. The scale moves up from there, going from stuck to accepting help. Generally, people are at an accepting help stage for the presenting need provided by that service. So if it's a housing service, often people are very willing to accept help around housing, strangely enough. But the other areas of their life, which may be directly impacting their ability to sustain a tenancy, are not necessarily engaged with, and many don't want to engage with them. From accepting help, there's this idea of a trying stage, which is represented by 5 and 6, where people are actually going, I can see this can be a bit different in this particular area or domain. I'm starting to understand some of the things behind what's happening for me in this. I'm starting to understand the elements that are impacting my capacity to make decisions or to do things. Some of those may be structural. Some of those may be my own issues. And I'm trying stuff on. I'm starting to work through some things, but I don't feel confident. I still require assistance to do a lot of stuff. I really still require the worker to be journeying with me in that process. From there, it's level 7 and 8 is finding what works. I'm starting to get some confidence about this particular thing, that the worker's taking me through the services. I've gone to a financial counsellor. I've understood some of the stuff around budgeting. We've started to look at some repayment plans around some of the issues I've had around financial stuff. Those sort of things are starting to work. I've been engaged with appropriate benefits. I'm getting a particular income, whatever that might be. And the top stage in the context of the family star is around effective parenting. I'm basically feeling really confident about my child's well-being and safety, about how we're working as a family. I'm not saying I'm never going to need to engage with the service again, but I feel like I'm at a point in that particular domain where we don't need to be focusing on it. And the underpinning philosophy about this is that when you sit down with a client and you go through each of those domains, and there's a guide that goes with each of the outcome stars, which is a very comprehensive guide about what each of those areas might look like, and it has a lot of I statements in it about how I feel, how I think about things at that point. That going through each of those areas actually opens a space for dialogue between the client and the worker, and it allows someone to find where they're at in that particular domain, to orientate themselves in that particular space. And then from there, the idea is that when you have identified a problem in a particular area for yourself, that you are likely to be more engaged in wanting to work on it. So the basic underpinning philosophy is that notion of engagement and motivation around engagement. How do we understand that? And anyone who's worked in case management for a long time will understand that you have clients who engage around presenting need. Presenting need gets initially met, and then from that point, even though you may understand there are many other issues around sustainability, that trying to get engagement around those issues can be problematic. So the point around the star is that it creates this space, opens up these spaces for conversations. Importantly, the sort of holistic nature of it, this idea that you have all of these series of domains, become quite important. We've done a lot of interviews now with clients and with workers, and it's interesting to hear from both sides about what has happened for them in that. For clients, for instance, we've spoken to people and they've talked about that from within a particular cultural perspective, it wouldn't be appropriate to bring up these issues and say, I've got a problem with that. And they talk about being at other services and people saying, is there anything else you want to talk about or work on? And they say no. But because it was a particular area on the star, and in this particular case it was to do with money, they said, well, it was there and they asked me about it, and so I felt I could say something. It enabled that space of conversation. from a worker's perspective, you have workers who often do an assessment. They have a particular sense of what are going to be the issues in regards to working with the client. Had one worker talking about how it was interesting. She was working with a young woman. There was an area on a particular star they were using which was to do with offending. And she said, oh, well, you haven't got an issue in that area. And the young woman said, actually, I do. And she said, well, what do you mean? You haven't got any warrants or you haven't got any issues like that? And she said, actually, no, I shoplift regularly, a couple of times a week. I don't know why I do it, but I know I'm going to get caught. It enabled that space for that conversation. It enabled both parties to develop trust in how they move forward. Sharon and I are particularly interested in implementation. We're doing a 3-year project with the Salvation Army, which has implemented the STAR across a whole series of programs, and that's one of the values, you know, it doesn't really matter which tool you're using, but one of the values around that is trying to think through how organisationally you end up creating something where you can get teams talking across programs, where you can look at professional development needs and so on and so forth. The thing about the STAR, each of the STARs have the same topology and each have the same method. So although there's recognition that in particular areas you will have expert knowledge around particular groups and programs that you're working with, the idea that you actually have a similar approach allows for professional development in all sorts of contexts. Interestingly, for that, the Salvation Army initially employed us to look at doing an implementation document and how you might think about that. Said document, that's available on the web, and I'll show the link later, but it basically shows a method of implementation which differs a bit from what Triangle, who are the people who have developed it, said. I think the other thing I would just like to say is that, and touching a bit on Michael's work yesterday about collective impact, one of the things that's been really important for Sharon and I in working with services across Victoria, and recently we were over in the UK, was to see the difficulty around data literacy from within services and the difficulty with the idea of collecting data and being held accountable to it. One of the things is that any time you look at collecting data which is an overhead on your current service provision, it becomes incredibly problematic. As well as that, many of the sorts of data that you might collect is sort of an end-of-service data process, and that only really captures the data of the people that survive your program. Not wanting to be rough, but that can be the case. One of the things that's interesting that we're seeing with the Outcome STAR is it's effectively a measurement of distance travelled within the case management process over time. And that data effectively gets collected in the process of working with people as they go through and do review stars and map what has changed for them. Some they'll go up, some points they'll go down, depending on what's happening in their life at that particular time. But what you end up with is a really rich set of data, which actually enables, which is very useful for the individual client in a case management relationship, for a worker and a client to be able to reflect on the journey they've gone through, to reflect on, for instance, the particular domains that they were not interested in working in, and how over the last month, I don't have a problem with my drugs, but I did do a couple of burglaries in order to sustain my habit, and now, unfortunately, I've been caught, and now I've got an offending issue, and I'm going to lose my tenancy. Yes, tenancy was the main issue I came in here for. No, I don't believe I've got a problem with my drug use. And you can see how the worker can then start to talk about that story and understand, for the client to understand where they're at in it. So it's a very powerful thing internally to the case management process. Outside of that, for a program, it becomes incredibly useful to understand which domains they're actually getting traction on. Is a particular service very good at working in one area but not good at working in another? What sort of professional development needs are required to get staff up to space in that? From an organisation level, it allows you to look at both how a program is travelling, but more importantly, you can look at demographic cuts of data. How do women do in that program versus how do men do in that program? How do people under 25 do in that program? How do single mothers do in that program? How do older people do in that particular program? So it allows you to cut that and understand what it is that you're doing. So in a sense, that idea that it gives you a body of data that enables you to think about what we do, to think about how to improve it, to understand the different trends that are occurring. Obviously, picking up on this morning's discussion about being in a neoliberal context, we do have to be politically aware of the nature of what that data might be used for. But that shouldn't mean we should be scared of it. It means we need to engage thoughtfully to understand how it is used, to be able to tell the particular story. Because without a doubt, particularly with the current federal government, and also in many state areas as well, there will be an agenda around accountability. There's no way you can move past that. And it will use numbers. There's no way you can move past that. So either we engage with the idea of doing that thoughtfully and doing it well, and having it tell the story, the real stories of the people that we work with, or those things will be imposed upon us. So I'm just going to finish up because I'm sure I'm up to time. Happy to send these slides off to anybody who is interested. If you want further information about the Outcome Star, feel free to either go onto Triangle website, and we have nothing to do with Triangle at all. We've got no connection with them, and they're not involved or fund any of the research that we're doing. If you're wanting a copy of the implementation guide, then there's a web address there for that. And the person who is the contact in Australia for the Outcome Star is, the details are there. I think I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, cool.
Well said, Sharon. Our next speaker, Evelyn Williams. Evelyn is passionate about ensuring that the voices of children are heard and are at the centre of her work with kids and families, whether it be in policy or practice. Speaking with you for about 10 minutes and then allowing another 10 minutes for questions. Would you welcome Evelyn Williams? Thanks, Evelyn.
I'm Evelyn Williams. I'm working with Community Youth Services in the Quality Improvement Workforce Development team, and I'm the lead trainer for the Signs of Safety project. Community Youth Services are implementing Signs of Safety across all of their 5 programs, and the hope is that it will provide a common framework or a common approach of working with children and families that puts them at the centre of the work that we do. It also provides a common language across all the programs so that we're all speaking the same way, particularly in regards to risk and safety for our most vulnerable children. Excuse me, I'm also very chesty at the moment. It's proudly an Australian approach, developed in collaboration by Dr. Andrew Tennell and Steve Edwards. Oh, it's not coming up. Okay, I might need some help with that one. Developed in Western Australia by Dr. Andrew Tennell and Steve Edwards. Andrew at the time in 1993 was working in family therapy, and Steve Edwards was a frontline child protection practitioner who was working in Western Australia as well. He'd been on the front line for about 16 years. Steve noticed that there was a gap between people who could talk about, do the work that they were doing, but they couldn't explain how they did it. And then there were people who could talk about the theory of what they were doing, but they couldn't actually do the work. So he started working in collaboration with Andrew. Over a 6-year period, they did 8 separate 6-month projects with 150 child protection practitioners in Western Australia. With the principle being that if the ideas worked, they would be in the model. If they didn't work, they were in the bin. So it became a very much from the ground up, what works, what that worker that's knocking on the door, what's going to work for them to engage with that family and to work with that family and to get the best outcome for that family. So very much based in practitioner work and what works and doing more of that. I'm hoping if I press the right thing. So there's three, hasn't really come up very well on the screen there, three key components of signs of safety. It's important to place the principles within its value base. It has its skills, which is the engine room of the approach, and the tools that go with it as well. So I'm hoping that in this short 10 minutes I'll be able to give you an overview of the values and the principles, and show you, particularly I'd like to show you some of the tools that are used in it, and talk about the skills that help drive those tools. The three core principles, that's working, yeah. The three core principles of the approach, number one is based in working relationships. Really, signs of safety is about relationships, 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 and there's a significant body of thinking and research that shows that the more those constructive working relationships between professionals and families are working, the better the outcomes for the vulnerable children. Thinking critically and fostering a stance of inquiry is the second core principle, which is very much about making that shift from what's well known as a paternalistic attitude in child protection, where the professional goes in and tells the family what's wrong and what they need to do to fix it. So Signs of Safety is trying to make that step away from that, so that instead of going in there and going in with a locked viewpoint, we're going in there with a view of looking for the multiple perspectives. And more importantly, Eileen Munro, who's one of the international leaders in the UK, put forward what's now known as the Munro Maxism. The single most important factor in minimising errors in child protection practice is to admit that you might be wrong. So going in there, knowing that there'll be other multiple perspectives involved in that case, and that we need to be looking for those and not locking ourselves into a rigid viewpoint, and then trying to gather the evidence to prove that. The third principle is landing grant aspirations in everyday practice. This is very much, again, around practitioner-based, what works on the ground, at the front door, out in the front line with our workers, documenting and building on that practice, sharing that practice so that people are not being suppressed. Workers, frontline practitioners are able to not be suppressed in their expression of their own wisdom and knowledge, and avoid or moving away again from that command and control type of child protection practice. So Signs of Safety provides a map which helps you to think your way in and through the case. You can do that as an individual worker, you can do that with your colleagues, and more importantly, families can do that themselves as well. It helps them to think their way in and through the case, with the workers being able to help them to do that. In its essence, this is what it looks like. It's quite a simple assessment and planning tool. There's three columns going across. The what are we worried about column, the what's working well column, and the what needs to happen next column. And importantly, down underneath it is the judgment column, which is the fourth domain. So 4 simple domains fit into that assessment and planning tool. They call that the map. That's one of the tools that they use, which obviously is very much around gathering the information when doing assessments in child protection practice. Again, key on building relationships so that all stakeholders are involved and have a say, making sure we keep the children and their families in the centre and making sure the children's voices are heard. Very much, again, driven by the questioning approach, which is that skill base that drives the engine room of Signs of Safety. And importantly, from a stance of humility, recognising and going into families, respecting the families as people worth doing business with, and going in there with a stance of humility, understanding that sometimes what we're asking families to do require huge paradigm shifts, and making those small, being respectful about that, and asking for small changes, small wins, and giving them choices so that they can have, even if it's sometimes the smallest choice, it gives them a sense of empowerment. So very much based on the skill base of questioning that drives the tools, which I'll show you soon, and it very much focused on building enough safety for the child in the family. Across the 4 domains, there's 7 analysis categories. Past harm to children is about looking at what is the actual harm that's happened to the child, or what's the actual incident that's happened. Past harm being the greatest predictor of future behaviour or future harm. Teasing that apart and pulling that apart from the complicating factors of the incident so that it's just the pure facts and the evidence. And then formulating a danger statement, which is what are we worried is going to happen with this child or in this family if nothing changes in the future. That's in the what are we worried about column. There are 3 analysis ones that fit in there. In the what's working well column, we're looking at existing strengths and safety as they relate to the child in the care of that parent. And in the what needs to happen next column, we're looking at next steps and, very importantly, the safety goals, which are what is it that we're wanting to see that family do, or what is it we're wanting to see those parents do differently to address the concerns that we have in the danger statements. So the danger statements and the safety goals become the bookends of signs of safety and very much bring in that balance as well. Signs of safety to me is all about balance. It's making sure we're getting a balance of the risk as well as a balance of the safety. So we're not just going in with a focus only on risk, we're going in with a focus on what needs to be, what safety and strengths exist in the family as well. So similar to the other ones, it's bringing in the professional knowledge and experience that we have, but also bringing in the family's knowledge and experience, getting that balance in the danger and the safety, and making sure we've got those working relationships moving between the 2 dynamics. Very quickly, I just want to introduce the tools to you, just a couple of minutes for those. These are the tools that fit along with signs of safety. Words and pictures, I'm going to have some examples to show you of what they are. Essentially, words and pictures is a snapshot of a difficult time in a child's life put into a story for that child. Why it's so important is that, for a number of reasons, the child then doesn't have to keep repeating their story, and more importantly, they don't then think that what's happened in their family is their fault. The 3 houses, I'll just flick through them, I'm being given 1 minute. So words and pictures, lots of formats, there's no prescriptive way of doing them. I really recommend that you look at the articles on the internet that Susie Essex has done in relation to words and pictures. The 3 houses tool, similar to the assessment and planning tool, it's based on those 3 columns, so it provides 3 houses: the house of good things, the house of dreams, and the house of worries. Again, the questioning approach drives the use of those tools. Really, really important with children's tools that we use the children's words, that we don't put it into our own words, and the power of that is that parents recognise and can see their own children's words. Parents recognise and can see their own children's drawings, and there's so much more power in that than an adult having done it for them. The wizard and fairies are also tools, again used to engage and interact with children to talk about what are they worried about, what's working well in their life, and what are their wishes and their dreams. No prescriptive way there as well. They can be done using a template, they can be done freehand. Children interact and engage with them as you're able to have those conversations. And the other tools are the safety house and the future house, which again are tools used with children for them to talk about what it is that they need to see happening in their family and in their home to make them feel safe. And they're the best person to tell us that because they're the ones who live it. So that, in its essence, hopefully is signs of safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that address. This is the other important part of the equation of our 3.5 speakers. It is your questions. Does anyone have any questions about Safety House, given that that was our final address that we just heard about safety, or any questions about the star, about the outcomes? There must be a question. Yes. Can we access the Safety House tools?
Resolutions Consultancy is Dr. Andrew Turnell's consultancy. He may have some of those tools up there. Certainly within the department we have them. But like I said, they're not prescriptive. If you can draw a house, if you can draw a wizard or a fairy, even if you can't draw them very well, that, you know, provides some entertainment and the kids really laugh and think that's funny. The wizards and fairies you saw in those examples were my drawings. I'm not the greatest artist. The kids thought it was hilarious. So if you can draw anything, you can use the tools.
My question is, when you are asking of children, as you said, as distinct from assessing them, what guidelines are there so that you don't misinterpret or read into the information or the pictures or the conversation that they might have?
I think it's important that you keep your questions open, that they're not leading questions, and that you just allow the child to talk free narrative and describe what it is that they have to say without changing the words. It's important to keep their words. That's the essence.
More questions? Yes, we have one up the back.
Hello, my question is really about how the outcome star and the CARS tool can work together, because they're both quite similar but used by different groups at different times, and I'd be interested in that.
I would say that the family star and the outcome stars in general don't have elements that are specifically about getting a children's voice, and I think one of the things about the ASK group is it does actually get a children's voice in that process. However, the outcome star, or family star in that context, is then about, in a way, mapping the journey travelled. And there is, and just to explain, you do a star using a guide, then at a set period of time, again, you do another star and record that data. The initial star feeds into the action plan, you then review that, and as you can imagine how that would work. So at each of those times, you get a set of data that tells you what's happened for that particular client with some qualitative comments as well. So that material becomes useful, and I can see them complementing each other actually in ways where you're gathering data but you're also dealing with some of the more some of the other areas that are actually talked about in this one.
I think that's a really fair assessment. One of the really important things that the Common Approach does, as you've said, is to give a voice to the child, and that can be really powerful when you've got a family sitting in front of you where the problem is the child, or that's how they're defining it. So it's a way to explore what the issues are for the whole family and not just why this child is behaving the way they are, for example. The Common Approach can be used in a similar way, so you can, redo it after a time to look at what's changed. But where the real value of the Common Approach is about capturing the story, the real story, and the qualitative comments, as that was explained. So being able to capture the whole story, and that becomes useful not only in your interaction one-on-one with that family, but in the ways that we access help for that family, being able to tell their story for them using what we've gathered, or by giving them, a written down copy of their story so that they don't have to start from scratch is really powerful. So I guess that's the key difference, but really there's more similarities than differences there, I think.
Could I actually contribute something for just sitting here?
Yes. We'd love you to.
Yeah. I think, the common things that I've heard across all of the tools, and it's really kind of interesting to hear them, is that they're all designed to really kind of embed a person-centred approach. So rather than being driven by the service itself, but by kind of starting from the point of the person that you're working alongside with, they're also attempting to kind of deliver some degree of consistency in engagement. And I think, we had discussions about kind of the randomness of opportunity, and I think in some regards one of the things that this tool does is kind of bring a kind of still a kind of professional informed engagement, but a kind of level of consistency, which means that you're not kind of, Lisa and I talk about kind of being at risk of whether you get the good worker or not in terms of the kind of service you go to, or even the practitioner within the service. So in some regards, I think the Salvation Army would certainly kind of value providing a greater consistency in regards to what happens within case management practice. I think the other thing that the common thread across these things is an emphasis on what I would call respectfulness, and respectfulness in terms of relationship building and recognising that it is a relationship and that we actually have to invest in relationships, and also that it's a conversation, that it is a kind of discussion to be had. And I think, for my mind, one of the things about kind of asking people about where they're at, what's happening for them, how they see things, we often talk about power, and we associate that with influence, and we associate that with access to resources, as we should. These are key sites of kind of power. But I'll also argue that one of the most significant exercises of power is the power to define reality. And how you define reality really shapes and limits the kinds of things that come after that. And so I think having tools that enable children and families to actually speak to their lived reality and, really embed that in practice is a really important thing.
So you have tools that perhaps could engender within the application of services from one service a consistent application of reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've interviewed people accessing service across a range of different kinds of service types, and so using a range of different outcome stars depending on the nature of their engagement. And one of the really significant things that came out of interviews with women with family violence is actually how they repurpose the tool. And so, which we weren't actually expecting. We hadn't kind of, picked that up in other evaluations and literature, and we were really just having a free-flowing conversation with women about how they engaged it. And a number of women talked about taking their star, and they claimed it as their own. It's my star. I took my star to another service and another worker, and I used it to tell my story about what was happening. Right. And to say, in some respects, and this is the plan I want you to get along with and got on board with. This is what I'm working on in my service. And here I am, these are the things I've identified as priority. Now I'd like to invite you to come on board.
So we were talking about this at lunchtime. I was talking about this with a couple of the people who are here today about the tricky thing of getting people to take responsibility and give them something that therefore empowers them. And you're saying the STAR works along those practices. It's in a visual language that they can follow, claim as their own, and then ask others to enrol in.
Interestingly, we've just come off doing some interviews with young people, and their responses and how they use the STAR. This is the weird thing about it, and it will be the same, I imagine, for you all too, that we have a certain sense about how they're going to engage with it. But human beings are endlessly fascinating about how we repurpose things to our own need. And it was interesting because for the young people that we were talking to, they said things like, it kept me accountable, it made me honest, it meant that I knew when I went to do the review that I was going to have to be looking at me. So that sense of it being an external reflection of their relationship with those particular domains or issues, and therefore what do they want to engage with, what do they want to do, in a sense, as Sharon says, defining what their reality is. It isn't about what do I see as a worker, it's this is where I'm at and this is what I want to engage with.
I might just add to that with a story, because we all like a story of how this works, and because the common approach is just the same. One of the people I interviewed recently is what we'd call an over-serviced client, a single mum with children with multiple fathers, accessing all the services under the sun and playing them off against each other, and really not getting anywhere. And when she participated in a conversation using the common approach, and then I talked to her about how her experience had changed, and she said, first of all, she said it's the first time in any of those adult focused services that anybody had asked her how this was affecting her children. So it was the first time that she had felt that she had that kind of light bulb moment when, hang on, I better do something about this because it's affecting my kids. she was a great example of how a service can define what the problem was, and she turned up in the town and first came to the notice of the housing services. So she was kind of their client, in the turf war, she was their client, and they were resisting her accessing other services because she hadn't dealt with her housing issue. And she said, you know what, I'm so fed up, that wasn't actually the F word that she used, with these people because they keep telling me that I've got a housing problem, and I don't have a housing problem. We live at the caravan park in a cabin and I can afford it, I can keep it clean, I know my neighbours, I feel safe, the kids have got a good playground. I'm happy there, and they won't give me the help that I need until I deal with the housing problem. That's not my problem. That's their problem. And I think that was a really great example of where the common approach helped the worker to understand that wasn't the problem we need to deal with. That wasn't her priority. By making her focus on something that she doesn't think is important, we're not going to get her anywhere. And over time, I spoke with her and some of her workers later on, about 6 months later. The change was dramatic, and she clearly said, I did this for my kids. But she took the wheel with her everywhere she went and said, this is my story. And she was quite vocal. I'm not telling you again, it's written down here. So it really became her mantra.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you thank our panel for a most illuminating hour?